مرحبا جميعا. شكرا لانضمامكم لنا اليوم. بس للي عم بينضموا هلا رح نبلش بعد حوالي دقيقة أو دقيقتين بس لنعطي فرصة للكل ليقدر يفوت
joining us to this webinar. We will be starting and everyone to join starting, of course.
مرحبا أستاذ أحمد، كيف صحتك؟ في مشكلة بالإنترنت. أستاذ أحمد سمعنا؟ للي عم ينضموا هلا لنا بس حنعطي بعد في عنا بعض تحديات الانترنت هالايام بلبنان فبس
For those who have just joined our call, just so you know, we will be waiting for another minute before we start because of some technical problems with some of the participants.
استاذ احمد ما بعرف اذا عم بيمشي الاوديو عندك، ما مبين عندي. اوكي استاذ احمد سمعنا؟ لا نحن ما عم نسمعك، بس يمكن هلا زميلي اندرو رح يساعد بالشق التقني. رح حنبلش.
We will be starting, and Andrew, our colleague, will be helping you with the technical problems. In the name of the Arab Reform Initiative, in the name of all our colleagues, I would like to welcome you all. I am Nadim Houry, Executive Director of the Arab Reform Initiative. Welcome to this webinar that will be tackling a very important problem, quite a chronic problem that has been exacerbated because of the economic crisis. I'm talking about the mobility justice in Lebanon. We will be discussing today the policies that are needed, how we can reach these policies, how we can promote mobility justice. Mobility justice is a topic that has been discussed in Lebanon for decades and decades. There is a lack of any serious policy for mobility, for transportation that is comprehensive, inclusive, that is at the service of all people, that fosters the right of people to mobility, that encourages an environmental policy based on equal distribution of spaces. So this is a demand, this is a topic that has been discussed like forever in Lebanon. Unfortunately, these problems have been exacerbated after the war, and the main policy in the terms of mobility relied mainly on using cars individual cars. And this is, of course, posing many problems in terms of mobility justice, in terms of the environment, and many other aspects. This problem has been exacerbated after the rocketing prices of fuel. The old model that has been adopted for a year, so Lebanese people buying cars, individual cars, became quite problematic. So, how can we get out of this quagmire? How can we solve this problem? How can we use this crisis in order to change and transform mobility policies in Lebanon? How can we have a more just comprehensive policy regarding mobility and relying less and less on the use of individual cars? How can we do this shift in view of the economic crisis and the scarcity of resources, whether at the state level or at the community level? Where can we start from? Where does change come from? Who can truly bear that demand related to mobility justice in Lebanon? What model should we be adopting? Advocacy from the civil society, uh, or initiatives that can be launched from inside the state institutions, initiatives from the international community? Should it be a popular demand? So, what model should we adopt now? For example, the the parliamentary elections are going to be held soon. Can we, for example, lobby members of the parliament to work on that? What is the role of syndicates and trade unions and orders? These are the topics that we will be discussing today. I would like to welcome all the speakers of today. We have Mr. Chadi Faraj, a co-founder of Riders' Rights, and we are organizing this webinar in cooperation with Riders' Rights today. He is one of the co-founders of the Network for Mobility Justice, and there are many organizations under that umbrella that have been working in order to promote mobility justice. We have Mr. Ahmad Tamer as well, and I hope that Mr. Ahmad can hear us. Mr. Ahmad is Director General of Land and Maritime Transport at the Lebanese Ministry of Public Works and Transport. He will be talking today about the opportunities and challenges faced in the ministry, what can be done today, what is needed. We have Mrs. Tala Kammourieh as well, who is the coordinator of urban analysis and policy at UN Habitat. She will be talking about a very important topic, which is the role of municipalities. What role can municipalities play in promoting mobility justice? We have been talking as well about many models of cooperation between UN Habitat and the municipalities, and you will see whether this is the true solution, whether the true solution is to foster, to promote the role of municipalities. We have as well Mrs. Viviane Akiki, who is an economic journalist. She will be talking about the political economy. This, in fact, had previously led in the past on adopting the policies related to individual cars, owning cars. Can we change this model? Can we shift towards a new model? How can that be done? Can, for example, a change be done without changing the entire economic model in Lebanon? As a journalist, she will be talking perhaps about the role of media in highlighting these demands and these topics. We have an interpretation that is available into English. If you would
just click on the interpretation button. وفيكم توجهوا أسئلة إن كان عبر ال Q&A، أسئلة وأجوبة على زوم، ويلي عم يسمعونا اليوم عبر الفيسبوك لايف.
You can ask your questions as well in the Q&A box. You can write down as well in the chat box, or on Facebook, you can write your comments in the comment box. I have asked each speaker to talk for 10 or 15 minutes. I will be asking them some questions. They will start with an overview of the topic before opening the floor to sharing of comments and questions. Mr. Chadi, I will give you the floor first today. As riders' rights and as the network for mobility justice, you have been asking for years and years for re-examining the policies related to mobility in Lebanon. How can you describe the current crisis? What are the opportunities for change? Do we have alternatives that are being seriously presented today? And how can you assess the role of civil society? Shadi, I guess, has a problem with his camera because of the electricity outage. However, he has a good Wi-Fi connection. So Shadi, the floor is yours. You have 10 to 15 minutes. I would like to share my screen, please, if you would allow me. Thank you for this introduction. You have summarized many of the ideas that I was going to talk about. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I guess you can see my screen now. Yes, perfect. I will be talking today about what we did in the network. We have developed a paper about mobility justice in Lebanon. So towards mobility justice in Lebanon, we work as 4 organizations with Chain Effect that works on promoting sustainable ways of mobility of transportation, mainly through bicycles. We have as well another organization we work with in Tripoli, with Trancha in Lebanon as well. It is an organization, an association that has been created in 2005, and this is an association that promotes green transport, and we are riders' rights. We are a community-based organization, and we work on promoting the mobility justice and on securing mobility and the right to mobility to everyone, on the use of public transportation, common transportation means. This is the map. As you can see, this is the map that we have already worked on. I don't know if you have already checked our platform. Many people after the crisis started checking our map. There's another master plan that has been developed as well. This is the master plan that shows clearly how can people be connected together, and how we can ease the mobility of people and different products. The Chain Effect and the Bicycle Association in Tripoli work as well on encouraging mobility through bicycles, on securing paths and pathways for bicycle riders. A map was developed as well in order to help riders go easily and smoothly from a place to another. As the justice or the mobility justice might be a new concept to the community or to the society. There are many concepts that are being linked to this mobility justice concept. This is why we tried to contextualize this topic in our Lebanese framework. When we talk about mobility justice, we do not talk only about moving from point A to point B. It's not only about how to move from a place to another. This is linked to the freedom of expression, the freedom of association, and This is linked as well to public services such as electricity, the internet. For example, now, if I didn't have a UPS, I wouldn't have been able to talk to you, and I wouldn't have an internet connection. I would have to move to another place to be able to contact you. The mobility justice is related as well to education and to being able to go to work. We know how many, for example, students, they aren't going to the Lebanese university because they can't afford to pay for their transportation fees. Another thing, elections are related as well to mobility justice. How we will be able to go to our villages in order to be able to elect our representatives, since we don't have any mega centers that allow us to elect members of the parliament from wherever we are living. Another topic related as well to the mobility justice, for example, is the public and the private projects. We know, for example, how much newly built buildings have affected, for example, their environment and the mobility justice. COVID-19 is linked as well to mobility justice. After the crisis, we have noticed how many people have had to stay at home. They couldn't move, and we could understand now, or thanks to this crisis, we could say so, that there are many people with special needs that couldn't move for years and years because of the lack of mobility justice. You can see here, for example, how some initiatives are being politically polarized. And you see here in this picture how in this bus they are charging different fees for Lebanese and non-Lebanese bus riders. So all these topics are linked to mobility justice. The reality we are living in shows that you don't have the right to mobility, or you don't have mobility justice. We know, for example, that there are some obstacles to that mobility justice. We have some conflicting prerogatives or mandates at the central level. There is, for example, the Council for Development and Reconstruction, the ministry. We have the parliamentarian committee related to transport. So there are many institutions, many entities that work on that topic, but there are some conflicting mandates as well. Another thing, the state, for example, is relied on a policy which in turn relied on owning individual cars. We lack infrastructure, a good infrastructure, for example, that help promote mobility justice. There are many victims that are losing their life on the roads because of the lack of mobility justice. This is how the situation is on the ground. The municipalities, for example, are not playing their role. We know that Articles 49 and 50 give municipalities mandates to work on promoting the right to transportation, how to promote mobility justice. Another thing, the public transportation means in general, or collective transportation means, are not well organized. We have some taxi lines, some cab lines, and bus lines, but these are not well organized. And we have encountered many problems, mainly after the increasing prices of fuel and gas. And this helped us see how much we truly need a common transportation policy. We have a problem as well in the trade unions whose work is not transparent or democratic. We have another problem related to the lack of encouragement, if you could say so, mainly in organizations, associations, and in jobs in general, to adopt this carpooling methods or new methods of transport. So as I was saying, they're relying mainly, and everyone is used to rely mainly on owning individual cars. And we know that because of that model, many people have been alienated. There are some parties as well that are benefiting from this crisis. You can see here this bus in from the 1960s. So transportation means were more developed perhaps back then than they are now. What about the vision that we have regarding mobility justice? We want mobility, we want transportation to be sustainable, available to everyone. We should have a comprehensive policy that is available to everyone. We need to develop a strategy, a common strategy based on our resources and based as well on common networks, if you could say so. We should have an efficient model based on our resources. We should have a collective model, a comprehensive model. We should be able to give the priority as well to people who would rather go to or move from place to another by foot. We should have as well roads that are well adapted to people with the special needs, and people with special needs have been facing many obstacles for the past years. We should as well encourage micro mobility through bicycles. Apparently 50 percent of movement in Beirut happens within less than 5 kilometers. So this is why we should be able to encourage new models of transportation, whether by foot, whether by bicycle. There should be as well a committee or an entity that would be responsible for developing strategies and plans for transportation and mobility. We have many examples, from Dubai and from other countries and the regions that we can rely on. It is very important for people to be able to rely on public transportation means instead of being isolated in their houses and the places they are living in. So mobility transportation should be a right to everyone. This should be included in the services provided by the state to everyone. You can check this paper on that link. This is a position paper on which you can comment. Please send us your comment if you have any comments. Thank you. I don't know if I have respected the time that was given to me. Yes. Thank you, Chadi. You have. And I will be asking you more questions later on. I will ask you please to stop sharing your screen, and I will be giving the floor now. Or first, I would like to welcome Mr. Ahmad Tamer, Director General of Land and Maritime Transport in Lebanon. Welcome, Mr. Ahmad. I would like first to give you the floor to tell us about the current trend, if you could say so, or orientation in the ministry. We know that there have been obstacles that Lebanon has been facing forever. Are there any new trends, new orientations, new policies that will be adopted? Did you think of that in the ministry? Are there policies that will be promoting mobility justice in Lebanon? Many people have been waiting for the transport project that should have been supported by the World Bank. It was a transit as well, I think, a model of transportation. Maybe this project was cancelled. I don't know if there are new trends, new orientations, new policies that will be adopted. What is affecting the transport sector in Lebanon? How can public entities help people overcome these obstacles? How can the state help children and students reach their schools, their universities? So these are my questions to you. The floor is yours, Mr. Ahmad. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I would like to welcome all the other speakers. I have examined many of the presentations that have been presented by some of the organizations that have been cited today, Chan Chan, for example, and other organizations who had organized as well an entire day in order to listen to their viewpoints. You were talking about a public policy, and you should know that transport is divided into plans and the implementation of these plans. In terms of plans, there are many plans, many pioneer plans in the field, excellent plans. And one of these plans or projects were model. So there were plans, model plans that were developed for the greater Beirut area. So plans, policies, projects are there. And these have been discussed by the Council of Ministers. So we have plans. However, the problem lies in the implementation of these plans. Many of the organizations attending this webinar today, Chan mainly, had participated in the elaboration of transport plans that are perfect, that are feasible. However, what is truly lacking is the will to implement these plans. What used to hinder that before was the huge reliance on individual cars, private cars. I don't know if you know how many cars there are in Lebanon. So in Lebanon, there are around 1.5 million private cars in Lebanon, so many cars per capita, if you could say so, even more than the number of cars owned by people in the countries that have an automobile industry. There was a huge reliance so before on private cars, and there was a lack of trust between people and the state. We have, for example, as a public transport entity, 40 buses, but these 40 buses cannot cover all of the Lebanese territory. And you know as well, in addition to the fact that these buses are not enough, we have a problem related to bureaucracy, so bureaucratic red tapes that are hindering the implementation of the plan. So I think that now we need a public transport plan that is implemented more than ever. The World Bank might support us in the elaboration of plans and the amendment of some plans, but we have to rely on ourselves in order to implement these plans and projects. Are we able, amidst the diverse entities that interfere in the work of the state, implement this plan? This is why I think that we should rely more on the private sector. There should be perhaps a partnership between foreign entities and the national entities. Of course, plans and projects can need to be updated, but they can be implemented. I think that we can have a tender for a PPP, a public-private partnership. We can ask the private sector to operate this system, this model, to take care of the maintenance. So we can work on a similar project. I think that many civil society organizations and associations know more than us sometimes about that. They know the obstacles, they know what can and what might hinder the implementation of these plans. They know the obstacles encountered in the implementation. Some of these plans and projects are model plans. There is a plan that was developed for the greater Beirut region. And I can tell you that the maps that have been developed for the greater Beirut region are maps similar to those developed in the UK and in other developed countries. So in terms of plans, we have good plans. In terms of transport, practically, The Lebanese Ministry of Public Works and Transport has already done its work, but the problem lies in the implementation. And as Mr. Chadi was saying, there's a problem related to conflicting mandates sometimes and prerogatives, which is hindering the implementation of plans. However, now we are facing a problem. There is a new ministry, a new council of ministers, a new ministry, and we have a new minister of public works and transport. And His Excellency, the minister, is extremely interested in similar models and developing a similar model and implementing a similar model. We know how much we've been suffering after the port explosion, and many transportation means many buses have been destroyed partially, and they needed the maintenance. The minister asked France for buses, but even if France gave these buses to the Lebanese state, we will have a problem related to the good training of drivers, to a good electronic connection between these buses. And there's another obstacle related to the presence of parking where and the bus stations where these buses can park. So these are obstacles and problematics that we might face. Another thing, there are some trade unions, there are some current drivers, and we need to see how things will be with them, will go with them. These need to be protected because these are people that have been working for years and years. So we should integrate these drivers in the current model, and we need to think about that globally, holistically. This cannot be done only by the Ministry of Public Works and Transport. A dialogue should be initiated first, and assessment is needed for the situation before we can do anything. We need to see who are the people that can be integrated in that plan, who can help us successfully implement the plan. What are the strengths and weaknesses? How can we build on the strengths, and how can we overcome the weaknesses? What are the external factors affecting the implementation of our plans? Of course, I would like to thank you for this webinar that is highlighting a very important topics, and I hope that by the end of this webinar, you will be able to draft some recommendations that can be presented to the ministry and that can help implement a new model. Again, the problem is not with the policies, with the plans or the projects, but rather with their implementation. As we say, need as the mother of all innovation. So whenever we are in need of something, we become creative, innovative. This is why we need to become creative and innovative now in order to be able to solve that problem. We need to promote as well communication between public and private sectors, between the state and the state entities, and between citizens on the ground. How can we encourage the use of bicycles, of alternative means of transport? How can we impose restrictions in certain places? We know that car dealers, for example, can import cars up and keep them up to 8 years. If we raise perhaps customs and fees on imported cars, we might be able to support in this way alternative ways of transport. So this is, of course, a topic that need to be discussed thoroughly. We'll need hours and hours of discussion and coordination between different entities, and we cannot do all this now during this webinar, but yes, we need a discussion about that. So what are we doing now in this sector? I can tell you that the minister and the ministry in general have already developed the general framework for the implementation of these plans. And now, while the meetings of the Council of Ministers will resume, the topic of transportation and mobility will be discussed. And I hope that soon a decision will be made. However, we cannot make any decision without talking about these problematics and tackling all these problems.
شكرا سيد احمد، بعتقد اكيد حيكون في اسئله كثيره
Thank you, Mr. Ahmad. I know that many questions will be addressed to you. You have talked about a major problem related to the lack, the presence or lack thereof of a will at the central state level. Yes, another thing, the business environment and investment environment in Lebanon. How can we encourage local or foreign investors to invest in transport without protecting them, without giving them incentives, without helping them, giving them the means to work? This state should play its role. The state should be able to encourage investment in this field. A company like Connex, for example, might invest again in this field, but the state needs to develop the right conditions for that. We need to work as well on developing other alternative means of transportation.
بس يمكن سؤال سريع على موضوع يعني كان في مشروع
such as railroads or railways. You were talking about the master plan that has been developed for the Greater Beirut region. It was a pioneer master plan, well-developed master plan that got the support, I guess, of the World Bank, but this plan isn't supported anymore. Was this project cancelled or plan cancelled, master plan? No, it is not. However, when this master plan or when this plan was rediscussed by the previous government, international entities said that we need to wait for a new government to be formed. A new government was formed. However, the cabinet wasn't meeting recently. So this is why this plan hasn't been discussed. I think that we need to encourage, and I am a public officer, yes, but I would like to encourage associations and organizations, mainly civil society organizations, to raise their voice about that topic, for this topic to be listed as a priority for decision makers. We know that people are suffering from many obstacles, but transport is exactly like water and electricity or power. All these are basic needs of human beings. I would like to encourage organizations and associations to communicate with public entities and to lobby on different entities in order for this topic to be prioritized. I would like to remind you that you can write down your questions in the Q&A box on Zoom, or if you are following us on Facebook through Facebook Live, you can write down your comments in the comment box, and we will be reading your questions to different speakers. We give the floor now to Mrs. Tala Kammourieh, Coordinator of Urban Analysis and Policy in UN Habitat. UN Habitat has been working with many municipalities and is still working with many municipalities in order to suggest some policies related to public transportation and to mobility in general. I would like to give her the floor so that she can tell us about some of the projects that are being implemented, what can be done, what is the role of the United Nations in cooperation with the municipalities, of course, in light of the current stagnation at the political level, central political level, and can the model you are working on be an alternative solution? How much can a similar model succeed at the national level? Are there some success stories, but that remain individual success stories, or can these be mainstreamed? Tala, the floor is yours. We cannot hear you, Tala. Can you hear me now? Yes, thank you, Nadim. I would like to thank the Arab Reform Initiative and the Riders' Rights for organizing this webinar. Thank you for inviting me to participate in it with all the esteemed speakers. Public transport, common transport is one of the priorities in the country. As Nadim was saying, as UN Habitat, so we work with the municipalities, with the different local and national administrations in more than one area under the scope of the sustainable urban development. Before the current crisis, we had considered the habitat and transport as two major priorities that are in need of a national strategy to be implemented. This fell under the national urban policies that we have been developing in cooperation with the Ministry of State for Planning. After a long process, we have defined these two priorities. We started working on that topic. As His Excellency Director General said, we've been working on plans and on implementation policies as well. Since 2018, even before the crisis, it was very important to promote sustainable development, to organize urban planning, to have a better use of land use planning, and to improve the access of the most vulnerable people to urban areas, to have equal access to the city. So these have been the priorities defined before the crisis. After the current crisis, this public transport or common transport became all the more important, and this started affecting many of the Lebanese residents, and there is a huge need now for similar ways of transportation. I will be talking about two projects we are implementing as UN Habitat regarding transport and mobility on the local and the national levels. On the local level, we are working with a group of municipalities in Tyre, including Tyre municipality itself, the city itself, in order to encourage public transportation. We have initiated a pilot project in the city, in Tyre, inside the city, and we will see how the feedback goes before we can copy this model to other cities and other regions. This project is being implemented in partnership with the Zurich municipality. The project aims at encouraging alternative means of transport instead, of course, of private cars. We have shuttles, the different bus stations in Tyre and its surroundings. This project will be including 6 municipalities in the Casa of Tyre, not only the city of Tyre. The aim is to limit traffic in the city, mainly in the region. We've developed a feasibility study, and the municipality has helped us a lot in the formulation of the master plan. We talked about creating spaces or having parkings for people, or where people can park their cars and take shuttles to move inside the city. This project has been examined thoroughly, and we have communicated with the local authorities, with the civil society, with the local communities, and this project will be implemented this year. We hope that this project will succeed. Yes, we are facing many obstacles, many challenges that hadn't been present when we started working on the project 2 years ago, but no matter what, we hope that you'll be able to overcome these obstacles. And we hope as well to be able to implement this project, a similar project in Tripoli, for example. not only entire. So we hope to be able to copy this project to other regions. Another initiative was the biking initiative that we have developed in Tyre as well, in the region or in the city of Tyre. These this initiative relied on developing alternative ways of moving from place to another, relying more on bicycles rather than cars. Two stations for renting bicycles at a very low cost have been discussed, and the local community positively responded or reacted to that initiative. And this means of transport, this network was used in a very dynamic way by citizens, by residents. We have sensed, thanks to this project, the importance of local authorities, mainly municipalities, and how much they can help in creating alternative transportation models. So, you know that the mandates of the municipalities are quite broad. Some municipalities have broad and large prerogatives and mandates, and these large mandates can be an opportunity. Municipalities can take the lead in implementing projects at the municipal level without having to ask for new legislations to be adopted. So we don't need to wait for new bills, new draft laws, the new laws to be adopted by the parliament before being able to implement any project, because municipalities in Lebanon have enough mandates to be able to implement similar initiatives. Projects at the national level might be hindered because of these red tapes, but municipalities can work more easily in a more fluid way. And it is very important to pave the way before the development of a national plan, of course, based on the local experience. Some of the positive things we have encountered is the positive cooperation and coordination between municipalities. They are sparing no effort, for example, to give away some lands to be allocated as bus stations, as parkings for cars. So we cannot do that. We couldn't have done that without the municipalities. However, we are facing challenges mainly related to outages. So power outages, electricity cuts, and even generators and alternative ways are not fully securing electricity or power. And this is why we don't have a sustainable model now. We are resorting now to the regional technical office that has been created by Untitled in the municipality. This office includes engineers and architects that are following up closely on the topic, on the use of these stations in order to promote the sustainability of the service. Sometimes these people have to work manually and not in a computerized manner because of the outages, electricity outages. So yes, everyone in all sectors is suffering from electricity outages, from power cuts. So we have now a small project that is facing so much challenges, let alone other challenges faced in other areas. Another thing, we need we need as well to stress on other projects. I will talk about another project, the Urban Policies Project. This is a national plan we are working on. We aim at encouraging the adoption of national policies, national strategies in this field. And this is not only related to the transport sector, but rather to all sectors affecting the transport sector. So we encourage the adoption of a plan, of a comprehensive plan. And as I already said in the beginning, it is very important to develop a national plan for that. Regarding transport, we have developed the framework of the different policies that can be adopted. And the framework of our work as United Nations in Lebanon, we were able and will still be able to provide consultancy or counseling, provide capacity building, training, funding projects in order to be able to fulfill the vision that we have been talking about. So through this project, we have defined the general frameworks for a common or a public transport policy. Based on that, we have suggested many policies, and we will be publishing a report in March that include these mechanisms and these policies. We have stressed on 4 different levels, mainly the governance of the sector, urban planning, relying less on individual cars, presenting incentives, what are the incentives that can be given, and improving these means. Before concluding, I would like to stress on the importance of thinking about transport and mobility whenever we think about improving the lives and the livelihoods of people, mainly in urban settings. So now we talk about the Greater Beirut region, about the governorates, about the Gaza, because we have a huge demographic expansion. So we need to think of an integrated policy that can help tackle different problems. It's not only about a transport policy, but rather about thinking about that transport policy in light of the economic model that we want for the country, in light of social justice. So I will stop here, and if you have questions, I can answer them, of course. Thank you. Thank you, Tala. You talked about a very important point, and I will be asking a question now to Mrs. Viviane, who is an economic journalist. As I said, any solution shouldn't be merely a technical solution. Some plans, some projects have been presented, have been suggested on more than one level. Some plans and projects have been discussed by the state, by civil society organizations. However, what is true lacking is a clear vision. And there is another problem related to the lack of political will at the national level that can help initiate change and that can help promote mobility justice. This might not be something new, but the question today is whether we can think now, amidst this free fall we've been witnessing in Lebanon, can we think about an alternative economic model? Can we have another vision related to transport and to the transport model that we want, while linking it to the entire economic model that we need to develop, and while linking the transport model to other sectors. There's another question being asked today: who will be asking for this change to be initiated? we see that the current political class is quite absent. At the central level, we feel that ministries are waiting for a political initiative to be presented, and the civil society advocacy will not stand alone or continue alone. As Tala was saying, the technical consultancy, assistance, and expertise in the field is present, but who is willing to support this idea? So, Viviane, what do you think about that? How is the transport sector linked to political economy? Where can we start from? So where can the change start from? Viviane, you need to open your microphone, please. Good afternoon, everyone. There is a very important idea that you have tackled, Nadim. If we are convinced that the problem is not technical, if the problem is only political, I think that discussions should go more towards ideas or ideologies. Since we're not considering that the problem is a technical problem, since we, as you're saying, we have plans, we have technical expertise. So if this is the case, we need to think about the ideology, about the true regime that we want, about the true system that we want, about the interests and conflicting interests that are hindering the implementation of any plan. In the discussions that have been held by the panelists now, they have talked about the same ideas that used to be discussed before. So whenever we used to talk about alternative models, they used to tell us we need to diversify the economy, we need to attract investors, impose a tax here, a fee there. These measures, some of these measures, procedures might be successful, or not. But besides that, we need to reframe things. We need to look at the sector holistically. If we go back to the beginning of that sector in Lebanon, ever since the independence, ever since the 1950s, we've been listening to one discourse, a discourse that we've been hearing in the US and in countries following the US model. Based on that discourse, freedom of people is all about the people having the right to have their own house, their own car. Yes, this is quite an appealing idea. However, unfortunately, the reality is different because not all people are allowed to own their houses, to own their cars, and others are only able to own houses and cars by resorting to debt, while other people have the means to buy cars, to buy houses, without that affecting their other needs. So there is an inequality between these two categories of people. And in order to be able to alleviate this injustice, we need a state with a well-developed economy, a state that can devise policies for all sectors, a state that has a fiscal policy, a fiscal system that can guarantee equal rights to all people, including equal mobility. However, the culture of private cars in Lebanon has been developing in Lebanon, and this has destroyed any alternative way of transportation. We had the tramway before in Lebanon, and after that, of course, this has stopped. And after the war, any alternative means of transport was either destroyed or halted. We have cabs, taxis, but no other alternative means. There has been inequalities inside the society, a lack of justice, people started moving from rural areas to urban areas, from Lebanon to abroad. So this happened during the war. However, and after the war. However, instead of tackling the root reasons of these problems, instead of tackling the true roots, as I said, we developed a system, a model that eventually gives the same results as the pre-war results. So even the chain that was still working during the war in Lebanon stopped working in 1992 for people and 1994 for products. So the alternative means of transportation were disrupted in Lebanon. And even after the war, we did not seek to develop any alternative way, any better model. There are many landowners, land developers, car importers, that those who import gas, oil, those who import repair. So for cars, so all these have had common interests, and all these work together in order to hinder any alternative solutions for the transport sector and for other sectors. Lands were used as a mechanism, as a tool to attract investment from foreigners, from wealthy Arab citizens. And instead of using resources to develop a productive economy, we spent that on consumables. So we stressed a lot on lands, attracting investors, attracting land buyers, if you could say so, instead of developing a public transport model that can link different regions together inside Beirut and linking Beirut to other surrounding regions. Instead of developing these models, these new models, alternative models, we invested resources in order to raise the prices of lands and properties in Lebanon. No one had the any interest in developing transport means that can help ease the lives of the people, helps them move easily from a place to another, from their house to their work. And the only model that was adopted was the model of owning private cars. As I was saying, there were many people that had personal interests that hindered any sustainable solution. So before the war in the 1970s, and based on the uh, studies that we have, 52% of people used to take their private cars to come to Beirut, and 48% used to take cabs or buses. But after that, around 68% of transportation towards Beirut and inside Beirut started happening through the use of personal private cars instead of using public transportation such as cabs, taxis, or buses. There are many people that benefited from the development of that industry, if I could say so, the industry of private cars. In the past 30 years, from 2006 till 2010, many investments came to Lebanon and money came towards Lebanon. We had an accident of $20 billion during that period. This state, instead of investing in the transport field, in the transport sector, allocated this money to banks, and banks used this excess, this accident of money, as you know, banks attracted people's money. People started contracting loans, mainly car loans, and mainly the bulk of the money was concentrated inside banks. So instead of investing money in development sectors and alternative sectors in the productive economy, this money was allocated to banks, and banks started attracting more and more money, the money of the people. People started contracting loans, mainly car loans, and this is how their money got stuck in the banks. There were around 82 thousand loans with billions and billions of dollars around 2022, with the majority of these loans being car loans. If we examine the customs figures between 2005 and 2020, we would notice that between 2011 and 2020, $11 billion were paid to import cars. Money so was spent in order to import money. So across 30 years, around $30 billion were used to import the private cars instead of investing in clean transport models, instead of investing in public transport. So we chose another economic model instead of choosing to promote the right of people to housing, to transport, to medical care. So the state chose car importers, investors in this field, instead of investing in public transport, in developing a well-built infrastructure. So this was a choice made by the state to invest in certain sectors, not in others. And we know as well that this was subject to confessional sectarian polarization. People started suffering more and more from traffic jam and whenever we used to talk about traffic, the state used to resort to the one and only solution, which is expanding the roads, knowing that this is not the solution. It's not about expanding roads for cars to fit in, but rather finding an alternative policy to face that problem. Besides that, you still have 1 minute, Viviane. I'm sorry to interrupt you. We've been witnessing another problem because next to these roads that have been expanded, malls, super centers, buildings were built, which increased more and more the traffic on the roads. We have invested a lot in expanding roads, around $3 billion from the budget, instead of working on alternative policies. So across these years, families, households were paying around 14% on transport. And of course, very few people have benefited from the money that has been spent in this sector. Even people who have bought the private cars cannot repair their cars or cannot even fill their tanks. We have as well disregarded the importance of developing lands in different regions. We haven't thought about agricultural, industrial, economic development of regions. People had to leave the regions to seek jobs, to look for jobs in other regions, mainly in urban settings. And people started living in urban areas, in the cities, with everything that that entails. And even in the city, even in urban settings, we did not have any urban planning. We see lands and lands full of concrete. We have destroyed the green spaces and built parkings instead. And the Martyrs Square is an explicit example of that. So we see that there are very strong interests that are prevailing of few people that are prevailing over the interests of people in general, of citizens in general. Before talking about technicalities, about how to attract investors, we need to talk about the balance of power that needs to shift, how we can impose the interests of people. This is a political work that needs to be done. We cannot change the status quo. We cannot talk about the nature of economy that we want alone. This is a decision that needs to be taken by the state. Do we want a rentier economy or a productive economy? We cannot disregard the fact that we need to think about the kind of society or of community that we need. Do we still need to have a society with young people only trying to migrate from, or do you want a society, a community preserving the dignity of all its people? What about villages? What about rural, urban areas? So we need the state to think about these policies. We need to have the state thinking about these, and we need for this to discuss ideologies, ideas, plans. It's not about technicalities, it's about the models that we want. Of course, we need civil society organizations, trade unions, the media, different entities to work together, and all these can work together to think about alternative plans and the vision that can serve this sector. Of course, there might be responsibilities allocated to different entities, whether the state or the private sector. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Viviane, but I need to stop. The idea is very clear. Yes, we need to change the balance of power. We need to think about the ideologies, the ideas, what we need. But I would like now to open the floor for discussion, to give the floor for people to ask questions, to attendees to ask their questions. I know that today we've not been only talking about technicalities, but about the political will, the presence or lack of political vision. We need to think about mobility justice as well, and how to link that to the interests we need to protect. Who will be able to change the status quo, this balance of power? So these are some of the questions that we can ask. Who are the parties, perhaps from the opposition, that are presenting these plans? Are parties thinking about in a traditional way or not? Who is working on advancing work in this sector? Some questions have been asked in the Q&A. People are always eager to ask questions to the representatives, state representatives. Are the plans in the ministry available to everyone? Can citizens get to know about these plans? How can we access these plans? Another question from Mr. Ali Zain. Mr. Ahmad is talking as an expert or a consultant and not as a person that is responsible in the state. You've been talking about reforms, you've been talking about the buses. Who is the person that donated $140,000 to reform the buses, and what for? Regarding the buses from France, how will these be operative? How will these be operated? Will we still face the same problem related to the presence of buses and the absence of a clear policy? What about the comprehensive policy that needs to be implemented? Why can't we name those who led us to the situation, to the current situation, mainly former ministers? Questions asked to Mr. Ahmad, clear questions. If you have an answer. You need to unmute yourself, please, Mr. Ahmad. The plans that have been developed are available to everyone. Any person, any association, any organization can access these plans. Yes, easily. I can send you the link for these plans. Everyone can benefit from these plans, provided, of course, these plans are used for a good end, to formulate constructive comments, perhaps. Regarding the presence or lack thereof of plans and projects, yes, there are some plans, as I said. I work mainly on ports. Let's say we build the best ports in the world, but we do not develop electronic systems or custom systems. This wouldn't do us any good. So we need to define well-built systems that can go with this developed infrastructure. Regarding the buses and the public or the common transportation, there is another directorate that works on that. I'm not the one in charge of the buses. I cannot tell you who donated the $140,000 and what happened to that. I can tell you that based on the request of His Excellency the Minister, this donation was presented to the Ministry in order to rehabilitate the buses. It is very important to know as well that the administration is quite obsolete. We need to rely on a public-private partnership within a comprehensive plan. We used to have plans, but a lack of political will. But we need, in addition to political will, a good administration, a good management skills. We're talking about this sector today, which is very important. However, we have another problem related as well to the transport of goods and products. It's not only about easing the transport and the mobility of people and persons, but the mobility of goods as well. You cannot imagine how much we're suffering and how many problems we're facing because of different barriers before the transport of goods. Regarding what you were saying, so I'm talking as an expert or a consultant, as if I'm not an official person working in the ministry. I can tell you that this sector is my field of expertise, if I could say so. I come from Tripoli, from a region that has been marginalized ever since the independence and up until now. We know that you have a centralized system disregarding different regions, and this is what led to the current revolution. So Tripoli lacks many resources. In Beirut, there have been some projects, rehabilitation projects, reconstruction projects that have been developed after the war, but Tripoli has always been neglected, mainly in terms of public transportation as well. And all the plans that used to be developed for the greater Beirut area. So this is why I'm talking the way I am, because I come from this region that needs sustainable development, that needs plans and projects. We always welcome any initiative from the private sector. This morning, there was a seminar in the ministry held under the umbrella and upon the invitation of the ESCWA. It was related to the imports and exports in Lebanon. And I always hope that different organizations and associations will participate in the future in similar seminars because public-private partnership is very important. Mrs. Viviane, for example, presented a very accurate analysis about balance of power, and people like her should be involved in the seminars that are being organized. But I have a question to her regarding what she was saying about lands and land investments and land use. I would like to ask you, please, instead of raising your hand, to write down your questions in the Q&A box. Mr. Nadim Domani from Chain was asking whether it is useful now for NGOs to work with the Ministry of Transport on transportation projects, knowing that this government will resign soon in May. So the question is just to you, Mr. Ahmad, but to the other participants as well. Is the priority building partnerships between municipalities, local communities, or civil societies, as you were just saying, or as Mrs. Viviane was saying, should we start by shifting the balance of power? This file, if you could say so, shouldn't only be a technical file, but rather a political one, an ideological one. We need to have clear choices taken. And regarding trade unions in Lebanon, and we know how trade unions have been created recently by political parties, state parties, how can we go back to a true work inside these trade unions? So, is the solution cooperation between civil society, municipalities, and other entities, or should we start working on another level, on the state level? But briefly, please, because we need to end at 5:30 sharp Beirut time. Mr. Ahmad, you can answer the other speakers as well. And Viviane, you can answer Mr. Ahmad's question regarding the choices as well, how to link the priorities with the priorities that were given to the real estate field. Mr. Ahmad, if you would like to answer Mr. Nabil's question first.
من خلال النقاشات تحليلنا للنقاشات الموجودة
through analyzing the different discussions, we consider that the main problem is related to the political will. We need to have a true political will if we want to implement a comprehensive plan. We need to think of the concerns, ideological concerns that we've been discussing. We need to work, of course, on shifting the balance of power, on defining who are the ones benefiting from the weak private sector in order to change the status quo. We need to exert more pressure, do more lobbying in order to change the situation. Now, before the elections, things can change, and this topic that we've been discussing should be a main topic embraced by political parties running for elections. The elections in May. We can work with different trade unions, with syndicates and orders, with the order of engineers, of the bar association, with the order of physicians. We can work with all of these in order to change the status quo. We can work with trade unions, of course. I'm not saying that there are no political interventions in trade unions, but trade unions used to follow up closely on these topics with us, and they have a certain power on the ground. And they might be sometimes stronger than some civil society sectors, institutions that are working more on studies rather than practical work on the ground. So there might be a cooperation, a coordination between civil society organizations or entities, between trade unions, syndicates, orders. Discussion should be launched between all these entities, and there might be a shared benefit to all. We know that the trade unions, syndicates, orders can gather people around certain causes, and civil society organizations can work in order to gather data, evidence, research, so they can all work together. So, regarding the way of dealing with the authority, with the state, how to change the balance of power. Tala, Chadi, then Viviane.
تفضلي تالا اذا عندك اي شيء حابه تزيديه على الموضوع. وين بتشوفي اليوم في ممكن يصير في خلق في واحد يبني على شيء نظرا للازمه.
Tala, where can we start from? What is the role of the United Nations in shifting the balance of power? You have a minute, please, not more.
يعني نحن أكيد ما بنحكي باسم المجتمع المدني.
Of course, we don't talk in the name of the civil society, but I think that we cannot continue working on the same policies that we've been adopting. We cannot allow things to go on as they are without shifting our model of working. There should be a participatory approach between the private sector, the private sector, the civil society, and the aim would be to develop policies in this field. Everyone agrees on saying that the model that has been adopted isn't working anymore. All stakeholders should be involved in a process aimed at defining the model that we need. And it is very important to develop and to design public policies that will eventually help us in our work. We need to define priorities and projects and technical assistance. No one can replace anyone. This is why every entity, every party needs to play its role. We need to know that we
عم بتزيد كل يوم وراهم. فأنا برأيي إنه لازم يصير في عملية تشاركية لوضع القرار، والبداية هي أكيد بوضع استراتيجية وطنية هي بتحدد كل التوجهات العامة لكل السياسات والمشاريع.
It is very important to be able to design, to define public policies that we can work under, if you could say. So Tala is talking about the participatory approach and responsibility. Some have been asking and saying that ministries should be able to assume the responsibilities. We've been discussing for years who is responsible for what in Lebanon. Chadi, what are the next steps for you as a network? What do you think is the priority? Building partnerships? Do what exactly? How can we encourage the adoption of the vision that you've been talking about? We have posted the link.
شو المطلوب اليوم بنظرك كمان بشكل مختصر كثير من فضلك؟
اوكي الحجاري بختصر قد ما في الفكره انه اخر شيء نحن هلا قايلين بكرايسيس عم نعيشها.
We are going through a crisis, and the first approach should be solidarity. This country is ours. Of course, every party, every entity should assume its responsibility. We've been having a policy of subsidies recently, and someone is responsible for that, and everyone needs to assume its responsibility. However, we all need to work together. As Viviane was saying, we need to know who was benefiting from the different investments and infrastructure and roads, and real estate. Who was benefiting the most from the policies that have been implemented. We need to regain our money from the banks, yes, but we need to regain our money from those who have benefited from the policies to serve their own interests. I think that the balance of power has changed during the crisis. No one can afford to buy a car anymore. The oil, gas prices are increasing. So we need to find alternative policies, alternative solutions. But I think that the decision is a political decision before anything else. This is why we try to communicate with different parties, and we put forward this concept paper, if you could say so, for parties to be able to adopt it and work on it. People need as well to raise their voice. Dialogue is very important. Sharing of experience and expertise is very important. There should be, in my opinion, as well, a sort of a political discussion about that. Mr. Tamer, I guess, talked about that. So we need a discussion, a dialogue about the transport or the mobility policy. Of course, there should be bigger political choices taken. Do we want decentralization or centralization? What are the resources that we have? Do we have enough resources or not? Do we want more investments in agricultural lands or not? So these are choices that we need to make now, and these choices will affect our future and the future of our children. We're trying to work on a grassroots level, but we cannot but work in a top-down approach, hence the role of the network. Find this compromise and put forward public interest before any other personal interest. Viviane, the floor is yours. There's a question related to real estate, but can you please conclude by asking the following question? Many people aren't able to live in the same way or adopting the same pattern as before. But up until now, we're not seeing a popular demand that is clear in this regard. So if we look at the skyrocketing prices, at the loss of purchasing power, we don't see any large scale popular demand in this field. I don't know if you have anything to say about that or not.
الموضوع او بعد في امل انه
Do you feel that
بتقوى شوي بخف الضغط
an approach in this field or not? Do we think that we need an approach in this field or not? Chadi was saying that things started shifting methodologically because of the crisis. So the crisis changed forcefully these dynamics. I don't know if you have any final comments about that. Every crisis undoubtedly leads to change, and new models will be created eventually. Yes, as Chadi was saying, car importers couldn't import cars in 2021, so their revenues have decreased, of course. However, if they're witnessing slow investments in the field now, this doesn't mean that others aren't benefiting from the crisis. And this is why we should think about devising a public policy in the transport sector to everyone. We need to have clear alternative policies, but everyone needs to assume its responsibility or his or her responsibility. There should be perhaps either popular demands or lobbying or pressure exerted in order to impose these choices. This is why I said that media, political parties, organizations need to lobby in order to adopt new models, in order to be able to impose choices, in order to be able to attract investors as well that support their choices. There is no recipe, if you could say so, but it's rather about continuous change. It's about lobbying in order to impose some political choices. So everything in our life is related to politics and policies. If I have water in my faucet, this is related to a political choice that was taken at a certain time. So everything is related to policies and politics. So this is why I was talking about shifting the balance of power. It's very important to know that we need that. I'm sorry, Viviane, but you need to conclude. I was talking about real estate. The real estate was linked to banks, and there are some loans related to some real estate gators. So this is why the real estate prices remained high in Beirut specifically, and there was more investment in the real estate sector instead of investing in securing a public transportation. So it is better for them instead of having a transport model for people to come from Tripoli to Beirut easily. So it is better for them, for these people benefiting from this real estate, for people to ask, for example, to buy apartments in Beirut instead of being able to commute from Tripoli to Beirut. Thank you, Viviane, Ahmad, Tala, Chadi. I would like to thank all those who stayed with us up until now. This discussion is an ongoing discussion. We have many ideas that we still need to discuss. Things are becoming clearer and clearer. We are getting to know more about the challenges we are facing. I hope that we'll be able to build on that discussion. I would like to thank as well our colleagues, our partners. I would like to thank the language platform as well. and good evening, everyone. I hope that we'll be having a better public transport, a more just public transport in Lebanon. Thank you.